Does it mean that what my mom did was 100% okay? Does it mean that no, it doesn't? But if that means that I could still have a part in where can I develop myself so that I'm no longer responding the same way, reacting the same way, as triggered the same way, that's the personal accountability piece that I'm talking about, where we could still show up differently and say, maybe there is something that I can do differently in how I'm showing up to help the relationship.
Welcome to Shaping Freedom. These conversations are about how freedom is actually formed, what we inherit, what stops working, and the choices that change how we live and lead. I'm your host, Lisane Basquiat. Someone in your family is waiting. Maybe it's you, maybe it's your parent, maybe it's your child. They're waiting for the other person to change first, to make the first move, to apologize first, and to really understand what they actually did. And in the meantime, when you do that, nothing actually changes. The silence gets louder, the distance starts to crystallize, and the pattern that broke the relationship in the first place just continues to run for both of you. Today, I'm sitting with someone who had that situation and decided to go back. She did the hard thing, she did the courageous thing, and went back to confront the relationship that she was in with a parent. And what she learned on her way back is something that every person in a fractured family really needs to hear. I'm looking forward to you hearing this conversation. Tania, welcome. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, thank you for having me. And I appreciate the introduction, because it really is a conversation that not many people have, but I think is very life altering for a lot of people when they change that perception and realize that how we perceive things is not always the full story.
Yeah, I know one of the things, and this is all just from me seeing you online, I think we're both first generation.
Correct.
Yes. So we're both first generation. And I have to also be very clear. Like, I used to think about first generation from the perspective of, I'm the daughter of a Haitian father. My mother was Puerto Rican. But today I see there are so many other ways that you can be first generation, including first generation healed. Right. So from the perspective of first generation, I know that there are some, from an immigrant perspective, there are some things there's nuance that I think is very specific and unique to that experience for the children of parents who have come here from another country, and the work that they've done to support and their pursuit of the American dream, and how that plays out in family. So that's one of the things that, in watching you and listening to you, I'm like, well, I get that, right? Like that is a thing, and it's a very unique kind of experience for us. I'd love to know your story, or as much of your kind of context story that you can share with us.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned it, coming from an immigrant family. My mother came here when she was really young. My mom is the 15th out of 16 kids. Her dad died when she was 3, so very big family, neglected in unintentional ways when you've got such a big family, immigrating to a new country, new language, new everything. And so, yes, I was the child that cut off my mom in the name of healing, because at that time I didn't truly understand her story, and how for her, how she showed up for us and how she showed up for me and everything was huge and a significant step forward compared to what she saw through survival and everything. And so I was the child that grew up as a middle child, and like normal hardships, now that I look back and think are normal hardships, but I felt unseen, I felt unloved, I felt neglected in a lot of ways. And I started to build an identity around that. I wasn't good enough, I was not loved the same way, my self-worth, all of that. And that's really where it starts in children. It starts in that perception that you start to build around that, and an identity around that perception. And so when I eventually cut it off in my early 20s in the name of healing, I realized that I was not healthier. I was not really happier. I had removed the thing that was triggering me, but I was not healing the thing internally that didn't need to be triggered anymore. Like that, almost like I was protecting my peace, but really I learned that peace within myself is what I needed to do, and not just remove everything that kind of makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And so I went down the rabbit hole of learning everything from neuroscience to psychology to human behavior to communication for my own healing. And eventually, when I started to talk to my mom again, because I saw her through the lens of a wounded child as well, versus just my mother who made mistakes, and she owed me one, and I didn't ask to be born, and all the things that I convinced myself of. I started to just change the narrative that I was told, and that was a big part of my healing journey. And then she got really sick. She was on her deathbed. I went down the rabbit hole of trying to help her. She was on a lot of narcotics and everything like that. And I just remember thinking and feeling like I'm happy that we reconnected before I could have ever potentially lost my mom. And she's with us now, and she's living, and she's happy, and she's doing better. But I mean, as better as much as she can. But all that to say, that's exactly what led me on this path of realizing that we are taught to heal our inner child, but oftentimes not actually told how do we change our identity around the pain that we've carried from childhood. And oftentimes it's never a personal thing. And we identify with my parents neglected me, or my parents were fighting, and we blame ourselves. Like whatever it is, as children, we internalize that and make it a part of our identity. While no one is really fully teaching, how do I reframe that? How to rewrite my story and rewrite my parents' story so I can completely grow through it and go through it and become a better, healthier, happier person because of it.
Mhm. So you're a middle child. You're one of how many children yourself?
I have an older sister and a younger brother from the same parents, and I do have two brothers from my dad's previous relationship as well, but they don't live with us.
Yeah, I'm a middle child as well. And I think there's a nuance to middle children also, because you have this way of
And,
kind of
and
like,
in good ways. I mean, for me, my sister
yeah,
grew up having health issues, so I didn't understand at the time why my mom was so much closer to her. Right. So if we argued, my mom would side with her. If this happened, my mom forgot my birthday one year, and my sister's birthday is 9 days later. So I was like, see, she doesn't care about me. She cares about her. She remembered her. She got her a gift. She did this. She did. So all of these things, when you're older and you're like, she saw me okay in taking care of myself, while my sister really did need her in different ways. And so once again, we create this story, and then we look for evidence to validate that story, which is what we see in this world, right? It's like we cultivate the story and we look for evidence to validate that story, when oftentimes that's not the full story.
yeah. So you said you were trying to, one of the things that you mentioned was about, feeling triggered by things. And I noticed that too, that sometimes what people try to do is they're like, I'm being triggered. So it's like, don't do the thing that triggers me. But the trigger can sometimes, and I'm not a psychologist and I'm not going down that route, but I do know that the things that get us, the triggers, the things that trigger us are sometimes a communication to us that there's something that needs to be resolved, right?
Yes.
It's not necessarily something that we need to run away from. It's if I continue to, hit my finger with a hammer and I feel something about it, it's a trigger, yeah, but it's a trigger telling you that maybe don't hit yourself with the hammer, right? Or there's something in your relationship with a person that needs to be resolved. Um, and so I appreciate the fact that that was one of the things that kind of helped you to recognize kind of your own pattern within this thing that was happening with your mom.
Right. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing, not just in my own relationships everywhere, is people are getting triggered and activated, right? We hear that word everywhere. It's triggering. She triggered me. You're triggering me. The way just hearing your voice is triggering me. And it's because it brings up feelings, unprocessed pain, unprocessed emotional needs, all of these things. So it activates you, and you go into a stress and a threat response. And usually, when you go into that threat response, what do? You're going to fight or flight. And oftentimes people are moving away from that. So, yes, the biggest thing that I learned is you have to be able to ask yourself, wait, why am I being triggered? Why am I being triggered? Is it making me feel some way about myself? And if the answer is yes, oftentimes it is, it's making me feel some kind of way. Well, that's a you job, not someone else's job. It's like, okay, well, how can I get myself to feel more confident, to feel stronger, to feel more resilient, to feel more stable, whatever it is. And so that then the things that are happening around you don't trigger you the same way. And that's what real protecting my peace means. It's like, how can I get myself to an internal state where these things don't bother me? Why? Because first, I know that it's not personal. Oftentimes, the way people are treating you or projecting that is because it's a projection of their wounded child, their inner pain, their unmet needs, their inability to have learned how to communicate effectively. And so when you start to shift that perspective, There's a lot more grace and compassion for the other person. You have a lot more patience towards that person, and you're not activated because you're just so confident and like happy with who you are. And that's the biggest thing is people think removing the trigger actually helps them be at peace. And it might feel peaceful at first because the thing that's most activating, and nothing activates us more typically than our parents and our siblings or our spouse, right? But especially those, um, you think that by removing them, you're no longer being triggered. But it's typically only a matter of time if you don't do the internal work before someone else is triggering you, something
Someone else
new.
pops up and does the same
That's it.
thing. So how did that play out, if you don't mind sharing that? So, okay, so you decide, I'm never talking to my mother again. Okay, or
Mhm.
whatever you said. I don't know. You stormed off, whatever happened. How did that actually play out in the family? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So when I eventually, left, it was because I was given an ultimatum. So I was dating a guy at the time that my family did not like, and I was forced into an ultimatum: it's him or us. And being in my early 20s, having graduated, college and all of this, I was like, and I work and I make my own money. I was like, you're not in a place to tell me what I do and don't. You might not like him. And so I made the ultimate choice and no, I'm not leaving him. It's a decision for you to make. And I can understand why she did not want me with him, of course, but ultimately it's not her decision. And so I left, not actually thinking it was going to be for a good ultimatum. And all of my stuff were packed in garbage bags and put outside the home.
They were like, you're really leaving.
Literally. And because I had already built this entire narrative, to me, I was like, see, I'm like garbage to them. They don't care about me. They
Oh,
never did.
wow.
It like really just validated that I knew that she never really cared. And if you can just throw me out like trash, then that just tells me then I don't need you. And so I was really close to my dad, and my dad never said a word, even though he was there when I was collecting my stuff and packing them into my car. Um, and I think, more broken about that, to be honest with you, because he was the one that always protected and defended me. And so when I eventually estranged from my mom, it included my whole family. So I was like, that's it. I don't need them. They don't care about me. I can live a better life. And I did feel a lot more at peace for a little while.
Because you were free.
Exactly. I was free. I didn't have to worry about someone judging me and telling me and feeling inferior. And then here I am with the attention of like my boyfriend at the time, whose mom, who like loved me and all of these things. So I was like, oh, but then as that settles and that sense of temporary empowerment and freedom settled, um, I wasn't actually happier. I would think about my family often. I would think like, why didn't they love me? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? And then what eventually happened is my dad was actually the one that was reaching out to me. And he would check in and I miss you and please come home and all that. And I was like, no, it's not happening. But it really took my own healing. Like I got to a point where the anxiety was so debilitating that I was puking every single day for years. And so it's like, was I really healing? So as I started to work through my own healing, got myself to a point of recognizing that it was an unhealthy relationship and leaving that relationship and all of that, I came to the understanding that it's not like we fully reconciled, but I was kind of like, I don't really have another choice. I have to shift my perspective and think that maybe this is not the right solution. And then through that journey, I continued to work on myself and understand it. And we just built a stronger relationship. I reconnected with my dad, reconnected with my sister, and eventually my mom. But it's not even like my mom was very like, she'll come around when she gets to it. It doesn't really matter. But all that to say, I know very well the feeling of when you leave that and you feel like it's so freeing, but I didn't do any healing. No healing got processed just because I left the situation. And so it had to happen within myself to be able to approach the situation differently. Did my mom change? Not necessarily. Did the dynamic, did how I feel like she changed to how she treated me and everything? No, everything's the exact same in many ways. But I don't react to it the same way because I have an understanding of what's happening underneath everything. And that is the biggest, I think, key piece for people to learn and be able to navigate any relationship, not just parent child, but to their own children, to their spouse, to their siblings, to their friends, coworkers.
The work that I do is about helping a person to heal the relationship that they're in with themselves. And the purpose, from my perspective, is so that you can contribute in a more positive way to your family system. Because my work is really about the ecosystem of the family. And I believe also that the relationships that we have outside of ourselves are just a way of showing us how we're doing in in the relationship with ourselves. And ultimately, whether you're dealing with a person who is really hard to deal with or not, it really does come down to you. And it comes down to the decisions that you're making and what's driving you. Because if you put that on another person, you're never going to be truly happy unless everybody around you behaves in the way that you want them to. And that's just not going to happen. So and I just want to say for you and for the audience, like there are some things that I believe we have a different perspective on. Um, but I also believe that at the end of the day, we are focused on the same thing, which is healing and health and being in a place where the things that are distracting to the quality of our life are removed, so that you can live a happier life and have better relationships with people, including the one with yourself. The thing that I do want to make sure that we're really clear about, because there are so many people, I mean, this whole topic of parental estrangement is everywhere. Like people are, it's just like the buzz and the topic. And in a previous conversation that you and I had, I think I mentioned that I think this whole idea of parental estrangement or estrangement from adult children needs to be reconsidered, because estrangement is permanent. Estrangement is you're done. I'm cutting you off. I'm never speaking to you again. Strain is different, because I believe that parental strain or strain with an adult child means that there's a way forward. We're strained. We don't know how to get forward quite yet, but there is a path forward. So I think that some of the languaging that we're using today is very dramatic and not helpful, because this idea that maybe a 20-year-old has, or someone in their early 20s, that, that's it, I'm leaving forever. It's not real. It's not going to happen eventually. I know that there are cases where maybe that is the case and it has to happen, but I don't have the percentages, but I would bet that 95% of the time, that's just not true. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 5 years,
Yeah, in your early 20s, especially where your peak identity formation, it's like I'm finding out who I am outside of my family, outside of my upbringing. So it's actually normal to want to distance yourself a little bit as you're navigating life. The problem that's happening is we're in a society, and you said it, we have labels and diagnoses for everything now that is actually feeding more of the victimhood mentality more than ever. And I think that's a big problem, because what's happening is everybody has unprocessed pain. Everyone has childhood wounds. And you said it, we're not talking about real cases of abuse and issues. But when it becomes so normalized for just normal family dysfunction, you're given this therapy and this clinical language before you actually have the emotional understanding. And now when someone makes sense of your pain, even if it's not the truth, they make sense of it, you hold on to that story. And so that's what's happening. It's like you are going through 20, 21, maybe 18, because I feel like it's getting younger and younger, 18, 19, 20 years old. You're stepping into identity formation. Who am I? You've got social media that's adding an incredible amount of pressure while you haven't resolved these wounds that you've gone through because you built a certain identity based on what happened to you as a child, even if it's normal childhood things. And then you're seeing 10 reasons that your mom was toxic, 5 reasons why you had, a narcissistic mom. This is being fed to you when it might not actually be true. And so this is what I think is feeding the phenomenon that we're seeing right now in this victimhood mentality, and why it's making estrangement so normalized, when the reality is you've gone through hardships that you have to be able to work through. That's actually necessary because it's a part of your story and what's going to shape you into becoming the person that you're meant to be, and not to stay in that victim mentality. But they're not given those necessary tools. And so that's what I think is really happening right now, and why we're seeing it more and more. Because you're right, it might even be a strained relationship, but to be honest with you, it might not even be a strained relationship. It just might be something that your parent never learned how to properly articulate their needs. And so that came off as aggressive. And you as a child didn't know how to communicate your needs. So it came off as defensive. And that created conflict in the communication that was happening and created resentment. So it's not even that it's a strained relationship. It's that nobody taught you how to communicate effectively to truly tell you your needs. We're taught how to say what we don't want. We're taught how to defend ourselves. We're taught how to just sit quiet and listen to authority. But where are we ever really taught to say, I feel sad, or I need you to just hear me without defending yourself? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, no one is ever teaching those things. And that's why not just parent child relationships, marriages are falling apart, relationships more than ever, because people are building that resentment instead of learning how to actually communicate and express themselves in a way that the other person understands, not in a way that's defending yourself.
Yeah, I think that we absolutely live in a society that has perfected the art of talking about what we don't want, and then when you turn that question around and say, "Okay, great, what do you want?" People, and it happens all the time, and people
You're
are
right.
like, I don't really know. I don't really know what I want," and I think that that is part and parcel of what's happening. I think for me, part of the challenge for me in your in what you're saying is that I believe that two truths can exist at the same time, and I think that's kind of where I'd love us to talk a little bit about.
Mm,
You know, yes, I understand what you're saying. That maybe uh, there is this idea that you put things on your parents, but I also think and believe very deeply that two truths can exist. You can have a parent who did not have the tools, or who had their own journey, or who are working through their own childhood situation, whatever that situation is, right? And that because they're working through those things, they're showing up in a way that maybe they would not if they'd had the opportunity to work through some of those things or to understand it. And then you have a child who is on the receiving end of that unhealed wound. So, what I'm having a hard time with is it's not an either or. Like, both things can be true. You can feel impacted by some of those behaviors in a way that is negative, in a way that is not in your highest and best good or well being, in your emotional well being. You
right.
chose to leave. Well, it sounds like you all got into it where it was like, you're with this guy, you're leaving. And they're like,
I
I'm
mean, it's
God, right?
similar
Yeah.
everywhere. To be honest with you, I love that you're saying this, because I do say that the two truths can coexist, and they do
They
to
have
coexist.
to.
They have to, because both of them are have a different emotional perspective and a different emotional experience of the situation. Both of them are true. And that's where, when I talk about the communication piece, is because if you can't communicate that, you're both operating from different places. You're right. Like, my mom didn't have the tools that she needed. Most parents don't necessarily have the tools. We're learning as we're going, and you're going to have regrets, and you're going to feel guilty and shame about things that you've done. And that 100% impacted your child. It doesn't mean that your child didn't carry pain. It's about one point. So, for example, for the parent, and that's why I focus a lot on the parent, is because how do you understand what your child is actually going through, and how can you communicate in a way that's going to reach them where they finally feel heard, not dismissed? It doesn't mean that you take full accountability, but it's the ability to acknowledge their emotional experience, which is really important. But then I also teach the child of, like, how can you show a little bit more compassion and rewrite your parents' story? Because at some point, you can no longer blame everybody else for where you are in life.
I get that. I get that part of it. The blame, like, because if I also get the victimhood thing, because I think a lot of people do. They're looking for someone or something to blame for their unhappiness. We talk a lot about the legacy that we want to leave, but what about the one that we're living in right now? I'm Lisane Basquiat. I'm a board-certified NLP expert and a legacy healing strategist. I created Shaping Freedom to help our community move from autopilot to authority. Whether it's through my podcast, the Lounging with Lisane meditations, or our signature candles and journals, I provide the elite tools that you need to heal and to lead your family more effectively. Own your evolution. Visit shapingfreedom.com. That's shapingfreedom.com. There are things that get passed from one generation to the next, Tanya. Behaviors that wind up getting passed from one generation to the next. And when those behaviors get passed from generation one to generation two, and so on and so forth. And the parent is positioned as the one who's bearing the brunt of all of it. It just almost guarantees that the same thing is going to happen in the next generation, because the accountability has to be mutual. And not every human being wants to be or chooses to be accountable. But I just think that things will not change until there is mutual accountability. And being a parent who has spent their life taking care of their children and spent every day 24/7 making sure that their children are okay. And when you have multiple children, it's a big job. And you're a parent, right? And so it's a huge job. I don't know how old your children are, but my children are adults. So I have a 43-year-old son, a 32-year-old daughter, a 20-year-old, almost 20-year-old grandson, and a 9-year-old granddaughter. Okay. And I am the daughter of a Haitian father who left Haiti in the middle of political turmoil and left his family as a late teenager to come to this country where the climate, the culture, the language, from Haiti, got here in December when it was like, 2 degrees out, like a whole, the immigrant story, moved to New York and, met my mother, at, the Palladium and built a family and all of that. And as a result of having been here without his family, in some ways he was separate from his family because the family continued in Haiti and he was here by himself. And all of that carries a lot, right? And when you come out of a culture or a society that's going through that kind of political unrest, there are things that you get here with, and being less younger than 20, and then, buying a house a couple of years later and raising, having 3 children and blah, blah, blah. There are things that come with that. And so what I know, and I've known all my life is, and what many people know is that their parents did the very best that they could with what they had and with what they were able to resolve and work through, or willing to resolve and work through. I also know that the role of a parent is in many ways a role, can be positioned as a role of superiority and authority, right? And sometimes when you have the option between, am I going to sit down and have this long conversation with my kid when I'm already tired and I have to make dinner and I have to do laundry and I don't feel like talking about the person's feelings? I'm like, so what? I forgot your birthday. I remembered all your other birthdays. I was tired. I had a headache, whatever was going on. I understand that. And there's an accountability as a parent to also understand the vulnerable nature of parenting and what it is that we're bestowing upon our children. And that's the thing that I am having a hard time resolving with some of the positioning of the topic around parental estrangement, because it seems very much focused on either the children or the adult. I don't
Yeah,
see
I
where
think you
it's
made it
like,
really
let's
I
talk
think you made
about the
it
family
yeah.
and how do
I
we
think you
communicate more effectively?
I think you're covering an important piece because as you're speaking, you're aware of the dynamic that your father came here in to have that level of understanding and compassion for. He probably didn't operate in his best capacity because of the pain of leaving, the anger of leaving, everything else, and then starting new, and it's so fresh. And you are right. There's accountability on both sides.
There has to be.
There has to be. That's why I teach a lot of the parents what I do to understand your child. The issue is what I see often is the child now has zero accountability and puts it all on the parent. And I see that all the time. I have this conversation all the time. There is children that sometimes will take accountability, but often not. It's 100% on the parent and the child has zero accountability. This is the issue that I'm talking about. So if I'm sitting here, a parent has apologized 1,000 times, has spoken specifically about situations and all, the child's like, no, it is what it is. No, I don't want to. No, you're still not. Oh, you're apologizing. You're gaslighting me. Like, this is what I'm talking about, where the child literally doesn't believe that they're doing anything wrong. Because if the child is taking accountability, when I see both taking accountability, there's repair in the relationship. I do often say that it does take one leading. So when I see it as like the parent is leading, taking a little bit of accountability, showing up differently, like they're working on the nervous system, they're communicating differently, they're working on that, they're opening up better lines of communication for the child to be more receptive, and also working with them on, hey, don't try to defend yourself or get into any of that. Build the safety in the relationship first. Then you can potentially talk about things that might have hurt you also in the relationship so that there could be accountability on both sides. But it doesn't start both ways, have to both take accountability in order to wear with the relationship. That rarely happens. One person has to lead and do that. And then there's something called mirror neurons where naturally the other person starts to kind of mimic a little bit of that behavior and that response. Right. And so, but what I see from a lot of the conversations is, especially now in the younger generations with the social media and everything, there's a sense of entitlement. There isn't a lot of accountability for the child. It's more of an entitlement.
Explain the entitlement piece.
The entitlement is almost like, I didn't ask to be born. You should have known better. You caused me all of this pain. It's because of you that I'm here. This is why I'm in this position. This is why you're not a part of my life. Versus a form of accountability of, okay, my parents are apologizing. My parents have gone through what they've gone through. Where do I play a role? At what point can I step in to say there's work to do on my side too?
Where did you play a role in the situation with your, and the reason I'm asking you these questions,
Yeah,
and
no,
I'm
this
going
is
to
good.
dig.
I'm glad we're having this
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah,
So
I'm going to dig. The reason, and I just want to be clear for a second, really quick. And
Sure.
that's because I want people to be able to, like, we're talking about it in some ways, we're talking about it more philosophically, but what I want is for a person who's in the situation, either the child or the parent, I want to speak directly to what's actually happening in their lives, you know? So that's the reason why I'm like, let's bring this down into like what is actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors. I'm going to use mine, for example. When I sat there and said, okay, what could I be doing? Like, how could I be contributing to this? Because I was genuinely like, I'm not. Like, if she wasn't doing this, I wouldn't be doing that. But there has to be like, and it's not easy, Lisane, it's not easy to look at yourself in the mirror and saying, what is your problem? Because people don't want to believe that they're a bad person. And they're not a bad person because they have to look at themselves and say, what do I need to change about myself? But I learned, and it was a hard pill to swallow, to say, I'm always told that I answer aggressively. Like the way I respond, I'm aggressive and I assert myself, that way. And I had to say, could that be true? Like maybe if I didn't respond as aggressively, my mom's response wouldn't have been so aggressive. And then I started to think back like, okay, she would defend my sister a lot more. And that's because I came in aggressively. So my mom, because she didn't learn communication, she learned how to defend. And then at that point I was like, see, she's always defending my sister versus me. So I remember sitting back and saying, could it be the way I'm communicating? And I started to study communication skills. That is literally why I spent years studying it. So that's an example of, does it mean that I wasn't hurt? Does it mean that what my mom did was 100% okay? Does it mean that? No, it doesn't. But if that means that I could still have a part, and where can I develop myself so that I'm no longer responding the same way, reacting the same way, as triggered the same way, that's the personal accountability piece that I'm talking about, where we could still show up differently and say, maybe there is something that I can do differently in how I'm showing up to help the relationship.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you. Because that's the point. Because like there's what happens, and then there's like, let me take a minute here and let me look at like, did I have to be so, did I have to say the thing? Did I have to roll my eyes? Did I have to, whatever the things are they were responsible for? So I appreciate you saying that, because what that further explains is that for you, part of your journey was, let me go back and I'm having this situation, but let me look at Tania. Like, what is Tania doing? What can Tania change? And Tania doesn't have responsibility for the entire relationship, but you do have accountability for how you're showing up in the relationship. Like, that's where you can affect the change. How Lisane chooses to be in a relationship is on her, on me, but I don't have responsibility for the entire thing. I can only be responsible for myself. So I appreciate you saying that piece, because that was a missing piece for me.
Yeah, no, for sure. I love these kinds of conversations, because these are the kinds of conversations that have people see both sides. And it's important for people to recognize both sides. And you said it, both truth can coexist. Was my mom right to sit there and defend without asking, why are you angry? And this is a big part of what I teach, because communication, it's like, And I learned that the hard way. It's like what I'm saying on the surface is aggressive and angry and full of pain, but what's the need underneath it? And so I help parents understand, like, if your child is calling you names and saying all those things, it's surface level. What's the need underneath that? Because if my mom knew the need underneath that, she would say, she's hurting, she wants attention. So her response wouldn't have been defensiveness. It would have been a little bit different. But at the same time, I have a personal accountability to say, how can I express myself and communicate in a way that if someone else is not on the same healing journey and growing as I am, I still can have an impact.
There have to be times where, or situations where the parent truly um, is oblivious to the impact of their behavior upon their child. That has to be, right? And so how do you respond to that? Because there are times where there are a parent who's just like, I did the best I could. Oh my gosh, nothing's wrong with you. Like all of that and those are behaviors that absolutely stand in the way of your ability to resolve your relationship with your child. So how do you deal with
Yeah,
those?
that's a really good question because I am a living example of that. My mom never changed her behavior. I changed how I showed up. And so there has to come a point. I made a couple of videos on this where you're right. There's some parents that won't change. They're not going to take accountability. They're stuck in their ways. And it's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, especially when we have the emotional language and stuff available now where it's like, okay, but I'm healing. Why are you still not? And so I'm going to speak from my own personal experience of the biggest shift that I've seen in what I teach and how I did it is if they're never going to change, how can I show up in a way that still preserves the relationship without me being activated by it? You are still going to get upset. I don't think that the job of working on yourself and the relationship really ever stops, to be honest with you, Lisane. Because there are moments where even a few months ago, I was traveling with my mom and it like brought me back to like 14-year-old Tania. And I was like, the things that she was saying, and she's a sick woman and she has these outbursts and stuff. And it's hurtful. It doesn't mean it's okay. No, but I had to go back and say, Ten, it's not about you. It's not about you. It's her pain. It's what she's going through. And so I normally, when I was younger, I would fight back and say, she's terrible. She's mean. Like she says mean things. Like it should not happen. And I just say, Mom, you're so cute. Do you need a hug? Like, you need a hug. And she can go off. And then eventually she just kind of calms herself down. And then afterwards, it's like, it is what it is. And I'm okay with it. So it's about making peace that this might never change. So how can I show up in a way that still feels healthy for me and good for me, but I'm not personalizing her behavior. I don't personalize it anymore. So it allows me to show up in the relationship, regardless of the mood that she's in or the emotions that she's in or what she says to me, because it's not me. Some parents, unfortunately, are going to choose to stay stuck in the wounded child. They're going to choose to stay stuck in that space. And we, as adults, because we're still adults, regardless if we have parents or not, it is our choice to say, how can I still be a part of their life without expecting them to change?
I think part of it is also, I mean, you made reference to, the developmental cycles and that age that you're talking about, the age that you were at. I know the age that most people are at when you come to a point in your young adulthood where you start to look at your life. You start to look at your life. You start to question your childhood. It's part of your path to moving forward. And what I see as this fracture point is that the child gets to a point in their young adulthood when they start to consider their life and consider the things that they've experienced. And sometimes it's with a therapist, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's whatever the things are. And then they come and they want to start to confront their lives. And the mistake that I see a lot of parents make is that they have a choice. Either you can look at that child's experience with them, or you can you can defend yourself in their process of considering their childhood. And there are two different paths, or you can ignore the whole thing, right? And so I think that where there are situations where there's this fracture that happens, it's because the parent has chosen not to, has chosen to defend and to shut down a very normal process that happens with every human being. Now, in some situations, maybe it's cultural, or maybe it's, because you don't have time to focus on, you don't have the luxury of, looking at your life or whatever those things are. Maybe a parent misses that. I know that my father was busy trying to get, his pursuit was the American dream. So he wasn't sitting down thinking about how was I responding to how, my mother treated this person or the other person, right? But it doesn't take away from the need for a person to do that. And I think that that's the mistake that a lot of parents make. The child comes and the child's like, I want to tell you how I experienced my childhood. I didn't like this. I felt this. I felt there was favoritism, or I felt like you talked harshly to me, or whatever the things are. And the parent gets very defensive, and they go immediately into all the things that I've done for you, all the ways that I've sacrificed, blah, 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 blah. And in my experience with a parent, with any relationship, if there's any relationship where I come to you and I say, hey, Tania, I don't like that this thing happened. And if you come to me with, well, I bought you lunch last week,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
bought
I
you
hear
lunch
you.
last week. What are you mad about? I'm
Yeah,
going to be like, yo, let's talk. I'm not, let's look at the situation, right? Versus, let's look at it together. Because I think
yeah,
when a parent and a child are able to look at something together, then the parent doesn't take it personally. So
yeah,
that
yeah.
not taking it personally has to happen on both sides.
Yeah, you cover something so important because this is a big part of what I teach. That is the number one mistake that parents make: over explaining, justifying, and defending themselves. You nailed it. Because what happens, and that's not just in them, that's in any relationship, right?
Yeah.
Marriage is anything. It's like, I'm trying to express myself. And I understand why a parent wants to defend themselves, because they're like, I had no intent of hurting you. If I can explain the reasoning behind why I did it, then you might not feel hurt. But it doesn't work, because then what the child often hears is, your explanation is bigger than my pain. Your explanation is more important than my feelings. And so I literally teach the parents on, how do you acknowledge them? Doesn't mean that you fully surrender, but I'm sorry I made you feel that way. Can you tell me a little bit more? Instead of like, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Look at everything that I did. Hold on, I did miss. And I literally teach that. It's incredibly important in any relationship, right? Someone saying, I feel hurt. And then you're like, what? I didn't hurt you. I did this, that. And it's like, they just want to feel heard. They want to feel acknowledged, because they obviously felt an emotional charge with what happened. And all you have to do is acknowledge that and then ask a few more questions. Then you can go back and saying, I didn't see it like that. Can I explain my perspective? I could see your perspective now. Actually, at first I had a different perspective. Let me share it. It allows for more of that open communication. But you're right. That defensiveness just shuts them down and says, it's about her feelings, her explanation, her justification over mine. And eventually I'm going to stop expressing myself and shutting down.
Yeah. Because at that point you're contentious, which is very different from this happened. Let's look at the day that you came home from school and there were two cookies and one cookie was bigger than the other. You know what I mean? That's a different conversation than, what are you talking about? I just made the two cookies, whatever the defense is. And so I think that's the part of it that when we get into talking about therapy as the demon, I personally think there's an issue with that, because I think that it's quite natural for a person to want to understand their lives, to understand the experience that they've had. And I don't think that therapy, and I'm not a therapist, I'm a legacy healing strategist. I do work around family ecosystems. That's not my bag. And I also know that therapy can be very helpful, and it's a tool to help people to understand their lives. And going to therapy is not, in my opinion, any more the problem than going to a hairdresser and asking them to cut your hair and blaming them for the fact that you have split ends.
Yeah. So I think for me, obviously, this is where we can defer, and I'm going to explain why I have a different opinion. The rise in therapy directly correlates the mental health crisis that we're seeing, higher depression rates and everything. Am I going to sit here and say there's no great therapists? There's a ton of incredible therapists. And therapists are good for, I don't know if you've ever heard about my 3-stage process. I talked about it on Oprah. I talk about it in my programs. There's there's a 3-stage healing process. Therapists are incredible at stage number 1, which you're right, uncovering the wounds, bringing them to the surface, what happened, everything like that. The problem is that's what's happening right now. And then they aren't giving the tools to full repair. They're given the tools to, cognitive behavior therapy. They're given the tools to calm down their nervous system. They're giving, tapping, all of these ways to calm their nervous system to help them, but not getting to the root cause of the issue. You can't sit across from a therapist where there's years and years of an entire other story that they're not fully seeing, and they're seeing it from the one perception. I know, I went to a therapist. That is what validated my cutoff, where it was like, oh, she did that to you? Tell me more. That must have hurt. And it was great for uncovering and finally understanding and bringing it to the surface. But what that also did is it built a lot more anger and resentment to my mom. And so it's healthy for stage 1, absolutely. But then stage 2 that I had to figure out myself was saying, okay, so now that I've built all of this up and I'm realizing I'm feeling all of these ways and everything that I've gone through, because of her, like I should not have all these things wrong with me and my self-worth. And the reason why I was, dating at such a young age and trying to find love outside of myself because I didn't feel like I got love within my home the same way, like all of these things, it went back to her. So it's natural to build up that anger. And that's where therapy is great for it. The problem was therapy never once, and I see it across the board because I have countless therapists that reach out to me saying, you're right, it doesn't teach you that, is how was I able to rewrite my mother's story so that I was able to turn that resentment away from an identity towards myself to understand her story? And I had to rewrite her story, which is what I teach. That's what helped me unlock everything that she went through, from her siblings to her mother, to how she grew up, to how she came, to how love was expressed to her. That turned that anger that I originally felt through stage 1 and allowed me to transform it to a little bit more of understanding and compassion. So when I was able to do that for her, I was able to get to stage 3, which was, okay, now it's time for me to rewrite my story, because all of this time I created an identity and a narrative about myself based on what she did to me, when none of that was actually true, based on rewriting her story. So yes, therapy is great, but no one is teaching you these other steps. And to me, in my opinion, this is why we have such a victimhood mentality, because they're learning this language. They're learning everyone is now labeled with trauma when you go to therapy, when oftentimes trauma is just childhood hardships that you went through, not real trauma, like traumatic events in the event of sexual, physical abuse that some people have actually gone through. A lot of people have actually gone through. And so that's where I don't believe in the therapy culture, in a sense of normalizing that language, normalizing the victimhood. People are now thinking that there's something wrong with them based on normal childhood hardship that they've gone through. And then they're staying stuck there because no one is actually teaching them how to rewrite their parents' story or rewrite theirs.
And what would normal childhood hardship look like?
Exactly like what I mentioned I went through, where it's like, okay, maybe I got smacked. I wasn't beaten as a kid. I got smacked. I got yelled at. I saw my parents fight like crazy. My dad was physical with my mom, and same thing, immigrant family. My dad, I later learned that my dad was hit by teachers. It was normal in their country and what happened. And so does it mean it's okay to have seen it? No. That's why I built the aggression. That's why I built the anger. That's why I built these identities around myself. But every single family has some kind of family dysfunction. And so what I typically say is, if it's one family story, then it might be a family story. But when millions and 67 million families in America alone, but if 67 million, 1 in 4 families almost, are following the same pattern, same language, same family breakdown, it's not a family issue. It's a cultural issue.
Okay. I think on some level it's a cultural issue. And I think that I think there were other factors personally, right? So I think that, therapy is at an all-time high for young people. I don't know the statistics around that, divorce and, there's family breakdown. But I think there are also other things that are happening within the context of the chapters that we're living through right now that are factoring into that as well. I think that stress is at an all-time high. The Gallup polls for happiness in this country, like we're down at like number 23 or something.
Right.
Young people, 25, don't feel the same confidence that they can economically support themselves in a way that just people were able to a generation or two ago.
100%.
Yeah. So I think that what that leads to is there's change in the way that families in this country in particular, which is different from other countries, where this is a country, it has been a very individualistic society where people leave home and they go off and they have their own lives, where other cultures don't necessarily do that. That has shifted to where this country is becoming a country where people in their 20s are oftentimes still at home because they cannot afford to go. So they're kind of in this quasi adult place while also maybe not being able to fully become as economically independent as they'd like to. So I think there are political, there's social, there's all kinds of things also going on that I think are leading people to, we are at the worst possible, there is a mental health situation happening in this country. And I don't think that the mental health situation has to do with the therapist. I think it has to do with, the constipation of a lot of things that are coming into the pressure.
Well, the pressure, just think about social media alone.
Yeah.
Social media is putting an incredible amount of pressure of what life should look like, what life should be. And that alone creates a comparison trap. That comparison trap alone keeps people stuck. So I'm not just sitting here and blaming therapy. I think that this is way before TikTok trends and everything. There's a lot that goes into that. But the numbers also don't lie. When you think about between 2002 and 2024, for example, the amount of adults receiving mental health treatment in America more than doubled. During the same time, mental health awareness, its awareness has grown so much, like 122% increase, I think that they had said, where you're spending 241% more on mental health campaigns, like $140 billion. But then depression rates, like in 2021, and that's in 2021, I'm sure it's even higher now, 57% of teenage girls that were surveyed have feelings of hopelessness, sadness, and depression. It's up 36% in just 10 years. Suicide rates are climbing, all of that. So it's kind of like, are the mental health measures that we're taking actually helping? And that's where I kind of come in and I challenge it, because we're aware, you're right, Lisane, you're right about all the things that could be contributing. I talk about the schooling system. I talk about all these things that could be putting so much pressure on people, 100%. That's why we have the mental health measures. That's why therapists were coming in and all of that, but it hasn't helped. It's only gotten worse, which tells me, is it actually helping or is it getting worse when the numbers are incredibly staggering? Antidepressant prescriptions for young people aged 12 to 25 rose 63% just in between 2016 to 2025. 221 million prescriptions across 18 million people. Like, we can do the math on that, which tells you, and I know because I was with a therapist, and when I went in with debilitating anxiety, what was I done? I was prescribed a pill. Well, why don't you go on this? It can help you with your anxiety. It wasn't getting to the root cause of everything. And so this is why I challenge a lot of the mental health stuff, because it's like we're spending on it so much more than 50, 60% more money, more awareness, more everything. Yet it's only gotten so much worse, which means whatever we're doing, and I think a big part of that is therapy, because 2 out of 5 people are in therapy. A big part of that is creating the victimhood mentality and feeding it instead of being able to provide more and more emotional resilience. That's my.
But Tania, is it getting worse, or are we in labor? Right?
What do you mean?
Meaning, I think that there was a time where, like, I was the child of divorced parents. My mother, had some things. I was raised by my dad. Nothing about my emotional and mental well-being was ever like that. It was like I was provided for. I've never missed a meal, like that. Those were the things, right? And it was everything that I needed was given to me. I had. And now there are conversations that are happening that never happened before about the how, about emotional and mental well-being, about, wait a minute, this is happening. How are we communicating with each other? This is a new conversation, right? And so when you start something new, very often, and the reason I'm bringing up is labor, is that labor is painful. And I'm talking about childbirth, right? It's painful.
Right, of course.
And it can be overwhelming. And it's like, oh my goodness, everything is different and there's so much uncertainty in what's going on, but it's toward a better situation. What I believe is the fact that you have done the work that you've done and have moved yourself into a position of taking accountability for your own emotional and mental well-being, right? And that as a result of that, you have impacted, influenced your relationship with your mom, where she didn't necessarily change, but there's no way that you can change without something changing, whether you see it or not, right?
Mhm.
But and you also have changed the narrative and the path for your own children. And I don't know how many children you have or how old they are, but the fact that, Tanya, you made a decision to do this work on yourself will impact your children, your grandchildren, and their children,
Right.
right? That may not have happened if you had not experienced the things that you did. So whether you did it with a therapist or you did it without, and or whatever it is that you've done, there is an impact that happens when people make the decision to do some work. There just is. The thousands of families that you're impacting with the work that you're doing with them, you are impacting families. So that it may not be therapy, but it's healing work.
The difference is, I think we're saying two things, but two different things, because you're right. I always say, like, what you went through had to shape who you are. The problem is when language is normalized before someone has the emotional capacity to understand it is what's creating the problem. So I had to come to the understanding myself through my own experience until I was emotionally ready to hear it. But what's been happening for since the 70s is some people did not have the emotional capacity or the emotional intelligence, even at the time, to be able to handle the volume of that language coming at them, where there's a diagnosis for everything, there's a label for everything. So it's almost forcing them on it prematurely, which is keeping them in that victimhood mentality. If they're going to, and that's the problem that I'm seeing right now, is people are learning you're narcissistic, it's trauma, it's triggering, you're toxic, gaslighting, all of these things without the emotional, the natural ability to get there and uncover these things. But what's happening is it's happening younger and younger right now, which is having people attach themselves to this language instead of actually naturally getting there on their own. And there's a big difference because it's the language that's almost being forced on them. There's parents that are now like, my child thinks that they need a therapist. My child thinks, and then it's forcing them into more of this victim mentality where the hardships that you went through, for example, yes, they shaped you. You naturally, the emotional conversations like we're having right now are so powerful. It's needed. I'm happy that we've done that development as a generation. It's incredibly important. But what's happening is that language is also being forced and normalized into everyday life before people have the capacity to truly be able to embrace it. And instead, they're weaponizing it.
Okay. I think I think that that happens sometimes, and I also believe that if you went to a therapist, like if you went to deal with these things that you were dealing with, I think that whatever you were experiencing, you really were experiencing. Whatever pain you had, you truly had. You know, whatever was upsetting you was real. And I think that if you know that it's happening, that in and of itself gives you the emotional capacity to be able to start to uncover it. Um, but I don't want to argue about therapy.
No, I don't think there's an argument. I think it's a matter of everything that people are feeling are real. It's at
Yeah.
what point are we going to be able to kind of understand that there's different perceptions and versus a personal attack. Oftentimes we take it that way. And that's what I'm saying. And like I said, hundreds of thousands of conversations we have on the regular where I see a parent who's like, my child went to therapy and they changed ever since. I can't even tell you the amount of therapists that have reached out to me saying, I completely agree with you. I see this in the field all the time. So it's real. It's happening. It's just, it doesn't mean that all of them are bad because they're really genuinely good ones. But unfortunately, there are also ones that do believe in the cutoff culture, do believe in the best way to healing is to cut it off. And they're introducing these labels and these perceptions very prematurely, which is leading to the epidemic that we're seeing right now.
What is your recommendation? And then I know we're coming short on time. Two things I'd love to know. What is your recommendation for someone who might be on both sides, uh, who might be in the situation of like being in their 20s or in the situation that you were in, right? Like, what would your suggestion be for the parent and for the child in this situation in their 20s?
The parent 100% is to like learn the emotional language that I teach. You have to be able to understand the world that your child is operating from because they're not operating from yours. And that's going to help you approach and not be so clingy and panicking and desperate and also too controlling of where they're at in their life in terms of understanding that. The parent needs to know that, kind of like we talked about, not defending yourself, how to ask more questions and allow that space for them to step into the identity formation. And then for the child at that age is to say, allow space that your perception might not be the only one. Your experience is real. Go through what you have to go through, but pointing fingers 100% on someone else is not going to get to the root of the pain and the healing that you need to get to. It might be an explanation for the pain, but not the way to move forward.
How do they do that? What do you suggest they do?
I mean, that's not an easy question in a couple of minutes.
I know.
I have like, and that's what I do in my renewal collective. My community is literally working on parents to actually implement that. I work more with
That's
the
excellent.
parents than I do the child.
Maybe it's just tell us how to get there. Like,
Yeah,
how
so
do
the
people
Renewal Collective
connect
is
to?
my community. Yeah, so
Okay.
I'll happily send you the link. It's where I have programs that teach you that, but I work with you in real time through your situation and understanding what your child is going through, how to approach them, how to communicate so that you're actually practicing the things that I teach so that you approach it that way. That's why the reconciliation that I see even after estrangement 4, 5, 6, 10 years is incredibly powerful and a high success rate is because they're operating and learning how their child is operating. And so that the child feels finally heard and seen and understood in a way that's allowing that conversation to open up.
That's wonderful. The repair map. Do you have enough time to like high level? Like, what is the
Yeah,
repair
the
map?
Repair Map is one of my biggest programs that I actually first built ever. And it's really a full breakdown of all the different stages that your child is typically going through, but then how to start reconnecting with your child and then having a healthier relationship. So that's what that program is. So, exactly like I'm talking about identity formation, it breaks down all those different stages, what that means for you as the parent. I talk about the biggest mistakes that parents make, which alone in themselves is like, oh my goodness, now it explains why we're going through that plus the cultural influences that are shaping it, and then how to approach your child based on some of those cultural influences.
That's wonderful. And best story, obviously, without talking about who the person is, but your best success story
Mm. I mean, I'm just
or the
gonna.
one that pops up now. I know you have many.
I'm gonna talk about literally the most recent one because I cried about it when I read it with my community. But I do have one particular person. Her name is Jamie, and she was estranged from her son for 4 years. She's never met her grandson, and she's been in the Renewal Collective for a while and working on herself and doing the accountability, but also understanding his perception and everything. And just a few days ago, she sent me a picture of them together. So it was beautiful to be able to see that. And she's met her grandson, and she's just herself is a different person than at the time. And that's the transformation that I love to see is because it's not just the right words, it's who you're becoming in the process. And she really did embody that and show up differently for her children.
And I would imagine that that makes all the difference, the willingness
100,
to
I literally cried.
actually,
Like that's exactly why I do it.
yeah,
100%.
yeah. And for her to be willing to actually do, like, to do the work and to allow herself to learn something different so that she can show up differently for her children and for her family.
That's
Yeah.
the most powerful part is yes, there has to be a level of accountability. But I tell parents that it's not that you're all wrong, but you're going to be so much happier and more steady as a person. You're just going to show up differently.
Yeah. How can we support you?
Um, Honestly, the best way to support me is just anyone who might be going through a situation similar, send them my way. I'd love to be able to help them because I feel like right now, like you said, it's kind of a buzz, even though I've been doing this work before the buzz, is I just want to reconnect families and I want to create such a dent in this epidemic that, eventually it's not really a topic anymore because people just don't cut off as easily. Like it's almost creating that ripple effect. And that's really what I want to do is because this conversation becoming more and more normalized is going to kind of break that trend and have it start to decline.
And what's the best way for a person to who's in that situation or who knows someone who's in that situation? What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Right on my website, Tania Khazaal. My website, my social media, anywhere across the board, you can type in Tania Khazaal and come and find me and join my ecosystem, even if it's just my email list where I share a ton of value.
And we'll have all of that in the show notes. So that if you are in this situation and if you're a parent, because I think you work primarily with parents, right?
Correct.
Yeah. If you are a parent who's in this situation, it's heartbreaking to see. We both watch parents and families going through this all the time, and it's really heartbreaking. And so I commend you, Tanya, for doing the work to actually raise your hand as someone who wants to help and support resolving this within families. And so if you find yourself in that situation, it's very easy to wallow in the pain of it because it's heartbreaking. But if you want to do something about it, and if you want to connect within a community that is having this conversation and that can support you and teach you some new skills to help you to actually do something about it, I encourage you to find Tania Khazaal online. She's everywhere. She's talking about the thing every day. Find her. We'll put the information in the show notes and get yourself some support and some help around it. I mean, sometimes it's fun to, or it can feel satisfying to vent. And this is kind of the flip side of what you were talking about before, Tanya. It can feel, there can be some immediate relief to not having to deal with it or to venting about it to friends who, hype you up and tell you, don't worry about it. You did the best you could. But that's not going to get you closer to your family, nor is it going to resolve it for you. So vent for a second and then do something about it. And so I encourage you to find Tanya's programs and connect with her. And if it resonates with you, I wish you the best of healing within your family, because that is what's important. There's so much happening at the macro level and at the micro level. Focus on your families, and most importantly, focus on yourself, because the answer to and the path forward, it lies within yourself. So Tanya, thank you.
Beautifully said. Thank you for having me.
I wasn't sure how. I knew we would have a great conversation. I knew that for sure. But I'm really glad we did this.
Me too. And I appreciate the challenge, because that's exactly what shows that healthy conversations can happen.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the podcast, as always. And Tanya, thank you so much. And I wish you the best of luck in the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Likewise. God bless.
That was a great conversation for me. And I have to tell you, I was not sure that we would get to have the rich conversation that we actually had, because in many ways, Tanya and I have a different approach to the same problem. But I'm very grateful to her ability to sit down and have that conversation with me. And I hope that you got something out of it. For me, it really is about the nuance of family and the importance of looking at all the different aspects of the ways that we show up within a family. So if you're a parent, I'm hoping that there's something in this conversation that touched you to help you to maybe start to think about the ways that maybe you can hold a safer space for your children. If you are an adult child listening to this conversation, I'm hoping that you are helped to understand what you can do for yourself to be more accountable, to make the change happen within yourself so that you can chart a better path forward for yourself and for your family. And especially if you are raising a family of your own, it's so important to do this work and to understand that what we don't deal with just rolls from one chapter to the next until someone decides to check it. My hope is that you would be the person, parent or child, that decides to check it so that the people in front of you don't have to deal with it for you. Somebody has to do it. I'm hoping that you choose to be the one. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. As always, tell somebody, if there's someone that pops up for you as you're listening that you believe might benefit, let them know about it. Until next time, this is Lisane Basquiat. Do the best that you can for your family. It's important.